Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. As the brother said, maybe some of you have heard something before from me, maybe here or on a piece of tape. I have people coming to me sometimes and they say, "I heard your cassette." Well, there's a misunderstanding about that. I'm not in the cassette business. I don't make cassettes. But wherever I go, it seems somebody's always got a tape recorder running or a video machine or something, and they pass these things around and so on. But that's not my business, and I don't know which cassette you might be referring to or what it was I might have said. The talks are not some kind of a thing that I memorized a long time ago and it all just tumbles out. I usually write them a few hours before I give them, and they're a piece from here and there and some repetition of what's come in the past. So if you've heard some of what I have to say before, excuse me. Not everybody has heard it, though. The topic has been advertised as the history of religion, and let me clarify that I don't have in mind to recite to you the details of the history of religion, to tell you in this year so-and-so did this, and then there was so-and-so, and that kind of thing. That's not what I mean by the history of religion. I'm talking about a view of the history of religion, that we could all gather up the facts as to the sequence of events, but what does it mean? And how did it come to happen that way? And Muslims have a particular view of the history of religion, which I'd like to talk about, as well as the view that other people have. As it happens, the study of mankind, usually called anthropology, of course, has a lot to say about religion. When the anthropologist takes up his subject, part of the investigation of man is man's religions. So anthropology has a lot to say about religion. It used to be that all the anthropologists basically would tell you the same thing if you asked them about religion. If you asked them, where did religion come from? How did it come to be the way it is? They all would give you back the same explanation. But in the last 30 or 40 years, there's been another school of thought developed, which was probably always there, but it's come to be something that has to be recognized, that the anthropologists don't all tell the same story anymore. The oldest school of thought always was to say, well, religion came because human beings have always been afraid of what they didn't know, and so what they didn't know, they worshipped. If the thunder and lightning scared them, then they made thunder and lightning a god, so that it wouldn't hurt them. If a fire burned them, then they found a god to look after the fire. And so the more primitive the human being, the more primitive his religion. That was what people usually said. Go back far enough and you find people worshiping everything imaginable, and as we come down through history, the religion gets more and more sensible and intellectual and so on. But there have been those who have insisted that that's not what the facts seem to indicate. That actually, if you look very carefully at the history of human beings, it seems that the farther back you go, the more intelligent the religion, and that as we come down through the ages, the more degenerate the religion gets. And the people who support that idea will bring all kinds of facts into consideration. One of the things that they point out is that when we examine any group of people, we tend to confuse three different things as all being part of the same thing. We look at their science and their magic and their religion, and we think it's all religion, when those are really three different kinds of things. Magic is different from religion because of a very opposite viewpoint. Magic is when you think that you have some influence over the invisible powers. Religion works the other way around. supposed to be whatever invisible powers there are influence you. And science, of course, is an explanation of the shape of the world. How does it work? And as it happens, you may find groups of people who have some very strange ideas about how the world is made. And so when people look at them, they say, how primitive. Look how primitive their religion is. But that's not their religion. As an example, I'd suggest if you ever get the chance to investigate it, it's been documented now. You have a tribe in Papua, the Kapauku, which were only discovered by the outside world in the 1920s. Before that time, this tribe was isolated. They had never met the outside world, and nobody knew of them. The Kapauku tribe lived in the island, and they thought that was the whole world. Now, if you ask the Kapauku, what's the world made of? How does it work? He may start off by telling you, well, the sky that you see overhead is a big bowl turned upside down, and it's got holes in it. And when the sun goes down, some of the light from the sun shines back through the holes, and that's what makes those lights that look like stars. That sounds very primitive, and so people would be tempted to think, well, the Kapauku is primitive. Well, maybe his science is primitive, but is his religion a foolish item? There was a little book written just a few years ago called The Kapauku of Papua, and it documents in under 100 pages what the Kapauku believe about a lot of things. And here and there it talks about religion. And in every case it points out something possibly surprising to a lot of people. It mentions that as soon as the Kapauku were discovered, well, the missionaries came running to save their souls, of course. And it mentions here and there how the Kapauku used to argue with the missionaries and used to embarrass the missionaries. And there's the story of one man who was old. He knew he was dying, and he asked his grandsons to help him, one under each arm. He says, take me down, I want to see the priest before I die. I can't die in peace. He went down to see the priest, and he asked him, he said, I can't die peacefully until I know the answer to one question. And this bushman, here's a man with a few leaves wrapped around him. You might think this is a primitive man. He said to the priest, you people have such an advanced civilization. Why is your religion so primitive? It's the bushman asking the priest, why is your religion so primitive? As far as the bushman was concerned, the missionary's religion was very backward, very childish, very foolish, because of a number of considerations. Some of it is reported in that book, the kinds of arguments that they used to have. It's reported that one day the missionary was reading to them a passage from the book of Daniel, and the tribe started to laugh, and so he said, what's so funny? And they said, read that again. What did you say God was? And so he read the passage where it says, God is the Ancient of Days. And the tribe laughed. They thought that was quite a joke. The priest still didn't see the joke. He said, what's so funny? They said, did you say God is old? The priest said, yes, very old. And they laughed. They said, you mean he used to be young? You see how the so-called primitive man is way ahead of this individual, that young and old are things that don't have anything to do with God. Whatever you mean when you say God, it's not something that grows old. And it was never young either. This kind of thing is in agreement with what the Quran says about the history of religion. It tells us that in every nation, every people had a messenger sent to them to tell them what they needed to know. Which means that the truth has been spread around to everybody. It may have got lost or it may have been corrupted, but it's been given to everybody. That's the Muslim viewpoint. Muslim is also told in the Quran that there are no new ideas in religion. That is, if you meet somebody that belongs to some established religion, if he tells you something about how his religion works, well, somebody long before him used to say the same thing. You'll still find some people who will tell you, as they come from the church, they'll tell you how their whole system is supposed to work. The Quran mentions that. It says when they say, for example, when they say God has a son, they're imitating what people used to say long before them. They imitate the people of old. See, as an example, if I said to you, maybe it's familiar enough to most of you, and I'm sure it is to some of you, if I said to you, what great religious figure was the Son of God, born in a stable or a cave at the end of December, who then grew up and he worked miracles, and then he died for the sins of men, but 3 days later he was raised up? Who is that? Well, as a matter of fact, it could be any of several dozen individuals. Osiris of the Egyptians, Adonis, Bacchus of the Greeks, and Baal of the Babylonians, Mithras of the Persians, they all fit that description. They were all sons of God, worshipped by their devotees, born the last week of December in a stable or cave, died for the sins of men, raised up on the third day, the rest of the story. As a matter of fact, Mithras was worshipped all around the Mediterranean more than 2,000 years ago. Very popular cult of Mithras. And his official title by the people who worshipped him was, he was the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. If that sounds familiar, it's because it says in the Bible that the first time John the Baptist saw Jesus, he said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." So I don't believe John the Baptist ever said that. People have been saying that long before him about somebody else. I don't mean to, offend, but what I'm getting at is that if somebody thinks they've got a new story, it's an old story. Doesn't mean that it's a false story. It just means it's an old story. Don't let somebody tell you they've got a new story. It's an old one. This idea of somebody having to die for your sins is part of a lot of religious systems. That somebody will take care of my sin problem for me is part of a lot of religious systems. Other systems say, no, it's connected with my activities and my decisions and my belief. Now, as to the history of religion, approximately half of the story, I would suggest, is outlined in 2 verses of the Quran in the 6th chapter. To get the context of it, you have to start about the 111th verse of the 6th chapter. These ayat were apparently revealed in answer to a question that the Muslims had 14 centuries ago, as the Quran was being revealed. The Muslims felt to be a Muslim is to be guided. The non-Muslims are not guided. But what about the people who say they are Muslims, but they don't really believe in Islam? Are they guided or not? They come and go with us, and they do all the things we do, but on the inside they don't really understand or believe this. Are they guided or not? And these verses continue on to explain how that may well be true, that there are among you people who don't believe, but they do everything you do. And the way they get misguided like everybody else is this. The ayah says, "For every prophet we have appointed from among men and jinn devils to come after them, inventing fancy sayings about them, so that those in whose hearts there is no belief in the hereafter will listen to that." That is, to the fancy sayings. And they will finish where they're supposed to finish. So the solution to the problem is this, that There have always been messengers, and they delivered some important message. But some of the people who said they followed them didn't listen to the message. They listened to what people said about the messenger. They became fascinated with the one who did the talking, not what did he say. And so they finish up misguided like everybody else. And I stress that verse says, for every prophet. This is God's plan. Likulli nabi, for every prophet. That would include the last prophet. That there are those who came after him who invented fancy things about him so that people might listen to the fancy things instead of what did he say, and finish up misguided. In this way, it's happened in many religious systems that the emphasis switched from the message to the messenger. A man comes, he says something, but instead of listening to that, people start talking about, who was that man? Wasn't he something? And they start falling in love with the man instead of what did he say. This is so much a problem that it even has a name in the church. They call it the kerygma problem. The Christian church examines this under the Greek word kerygma, which has to do with preaching, because the question they ask concerns Jesus. They say, how did it happen that the one who did the preaching became the one we preach about? Or as one man has said, Jesus talked about the kingdom of God, and everybody who came after him talked about Jesus. They're talking about the messenger instead of the message. As I say, they call it the kerygma problem. I want to know, how do you pass from one to the other? How did that come to be? What often happens, of course, if the emphasis goes from what did he say to who is he, then in the generations that come after, whichever messenger this is, biographies, stories about the messenger become very important. And people start to compete to who can tell the nicest story about somebody who's now gone. And flattery becomes more and more exaggerated. He might have done a good thing, and it gets blown up into a bigger and bigger and bigger thing until it becomes unbelievable. Compare this to what the Quran warns us about. There's an ayah that tells the Muslims, or the reader of the Quran, God says, we raise up prophets, some of them above the others. So there are degrees of importance to prophets. This one is more important than that one, and so on. But there's another verse that tells the believer that we are not to make any distinction among the prophets. So there may be this prophet that's superior to that prophet, superior to this prophet, and so on. But you, the believer, are supposed to treat them all the same. That's a command. It's God who makes the distinctions. And you, the believer, have no business saying, well, this one ranks above that one. The ayah says, we make no distinction among any of them. That's the business of Allah, not the business of us. He will make it clear to us, as it says so many times, that on many other subjects, the truth of the matter will be made clear to you on the last day. In the meantime, follow these instructions, and you can't go wrong. So it is that the Muslim reminds himself and others that the priority in the Quran is, as I've said several times in different circumstances, the priority is not to tell the non-Muslim, you should turn your back on what you have and come with me. The priority is first to tell the person, what you have you should re-examine. Commit no excesses. It addresses various groups by names, the Christians and the Jews and the Sabaeans and the Magians and so on, and tells them, commit no excess in your religion. It doesn't say leave your religion. That's step 2, 3, or 4 maybe, but it starts off by saying, commit no excess. Don't say more than you have the right to say. So if you tell me, as a Christian, for example, points 1, 2, and 3, I might agree with you. When you get to point number 4, you may say something for which there's no proof. And the Muslim wants to say, if you can't prove that, why don't you just set it aside? Stick with what you can prove. Because we both believe what you can prove. We have proof. The thing can follow if a nation becomes so interested in the man instead of what he said. It's an automatic thing that most often comes. If the emphasis is on the speaker and not the speech, racial pride and nationalism start to stir up in people. If the emphasis is on the messenger, so it is that a lot of religions are named after men. A lot of religions are named after the places where they came from. This can be trouble. I'm not saying it always is, but it can be trouble because it means maybe the emphasis is in the wrong place. You're not talking about the message if you're talking about the place where it came from. More often than this, maybe, what happens is, in order to compensate for maybe lost pride or something, you may have a group of people who they follow a religion, but the so-called founder or the messenger came from some other place or some other racial background. So as they start to develop their picture of who is the messenger, it starts to get bent into the shape of what they look like or where they come from. Somebody said only a generation ago, God is an American. Some people will tell you today he's a Republican. He's not only an American, he belongs to this party. So it was that you have a movie which, a cinema, a motion picture that has been around for some time now, Jesus of Nazareth. It's interesting that the man who plays Jesus in that movie has blue eyes. It's extremely unlikely that Jesus had blue eyes, considering who his ancestry was, but the bulk of the people who appreciate him in the part of the world where they made that movie can understand a man with blue eyes better than one with black eyes, I guess. But you see, what causes that kind of shift is that the emphasis is on a man instead of what did he say. So you tend to want to make that man a lot like you. If these verses tell half the story, that is, that half the story of religion is because people shifted from the message to the messenger, the other half of the story would just about be covered by another verse in the Quran that tells us about the source of a lot of deviation and why are there many religions. It's in the 3rd surah and the 6th ayah or verse. It tells us in that place that the Quran has 2 kinds of verses in it. That the verses are either muhkamat or mutashabihat. And that verse is quoted by Muslims a lot. Excuse me, they quote half that verse a lot. They don't usually quote the whole thing. They quote enough of it to try to tell you that the Quran is a very dangerous thing to read. Only a few people can understand it because, look, some of the verses are mutashabihat, which they tell you means secret. Only a few people know. You have to trust them to tell you. If they keep reading, that's exactly the opposite of what's being discussed. It tells you that, yes, there are 2 kinds of verses. But anybody who tells you that they know all about these secret ones, watch out for him. That's the man who will mislead you. It's a warning. There's no mystery about the meaning of that ayah. Muhkamat is one kind of a verse. It comes from an Arabic root that means locked, or locked in place. The root is ahkam. What is locked in place, muhkamat, would be like an item in a piece of machinery that is so tightly fixed in the machine that when the machine runs, it doesn't shake. It's locked in place. Some of the verses of the Quran are like that. It means you can't take them any place, you can't make them mean anything except what they say. The first verse of that chapter says, Allah, la ilaha illahu. That is Allah. There is no deity but He. Now people cannot sit around and argue about what do you think that means. It only has one meaning. That's muhkamat. That's something like, the better word in English might be explicit. When you go to a shop and the sign is hanging on the door and it says closed, you don't turn to your friend and say, what do you think is the meaning of that? How do you interpret closed? It says what it means. There's no discussion. We all know. That's explicit. And some of the verses of the Quran are said to be mutashabihat, which comes from a verb in shabha that means could be. Mutashabihat. Sometimes it's translated in English as ambiguous. I don't like that, really. Maybe a better word would be consimilar. It means it has a shared similarity with things, others. For example, the same root word is used in the verses in the Quran that talk about Bani Israel, and they were told to sacrifice a cow, and they said, which cow? They all look alike. You mean this cow or maybe that cow? And that sentence is built around this same verb, shabha. The Jews were saying, it's not clear which one. It could be this cow or it could be that one. In the same way, some verses of the Quran could mean this or they could mean that. If, as this verse goes on to say, you take these verses apart from the ones that are locked in place, then try to give them a meaning and you'll go astray. It says the muhkamat are the basis. The ones that are locked in place will lead you through the ones that can be ambiguous. As they could mean this or they could mean that. But they can't have two meanings if you compare them to the ones that are locked in place. What happens to, well, to give you an example, there is a man in South America, in Guyana. He wrote a little book to the Muslims saying that according to the Quran, Jesus is God. And he proves it by quoting about 7 different verses from the Quran. But you see, what he did was he tears those verses loose from their context and quotes them to you. If you put them back where they came from and compare them to the verses which are clear, they can't mean what he says they mean. The same kind of thing has happened then in so many times and places. When people have been given clear sayings and some sayings that are not quite so clear, they leave the clear and they pay attention to those things that can be bent this way or that way. Left behind the things that would guide them straight and took the things that they can shape into whatever they like. This, by the way, is not a defect in the Quran. If that ever occurs to somebody to say, well, maybe all of the Quran should have been muhkamat, all locked in place. The simple reason it can't is because the Quran, unlike most religious scriptures, talks about the Quran. It talks about itself. It mentions Quran by name 70 times, and by other names and descriptions many more times. So when you have an item which is referring to itself, some verses have to stand on top of other verses. If each verse stood all by itself, you don't have a book anymore. You have 3,100 pieces, that's all. The Quran is a united thing that's woven back upon itself. That's why some verses have to depend on other verses. In any case, what I was trying to get at is that you have a situation, for example, the Quran says, who pledges loyalty to the messenger pledges loyalty to Allah. Now, if you took that verse loose from the Quran, you might say, you see, this means Muhammad is God. Astaghfirullah. Because it says, who pledges loyalty to the messenger pledges loyalty to Allah. You could bend and shape it however you like, but put it back where it came from. Consider all of the verses that are very clear on this subject. You realize whatever it means, it doesn't mean that. Now compare that to what a person will do if he takes hold of one of the reported sayings of Jesus, where he said, who honors me honors God. And people say, oh, you see, he was God. That's what he said. If you honor me, you honor God. Because I am God, is what they wish he would have said, but he didn't finish that way. So it may mean that, but put it back where it came from and compare it to the other things he's reported to have said, and whatever it means, it can't mean that. It's reported that he said on one occasion, There are things which God knows which I don't know. Now, whoever says that isn't God. God knows what I don't know. So I'm not God. Seems like the only way you can understand that. So what happens when you take a verse and you give it a meaning, like who honors me honors God means he's God, and you're confronted with another one which clearly indicates that, no, who says this can't be God? Well, what people do is they give it a label, and that makes it go away. There's a collection of things like that where Jesus says, for example, God is greater than I am, and God knows what I don't know, and I never said a thing except what God told me to say, and so on. They put that in a collection. It's called the difficult sayings of Jesus. Difficult, all right. Difficult because it doesn't fit with these other ideas. But to give it a label doesn't make it go away. That's something like if you have a problem you can't solve, you work on it for a long time and then decide, oh, I know what I do with this. I put it in this box labeled unsolved problems. There. Takes care of that. This is an unsolved problem. That doesn't finish the matter. It seems more likely that the labels ought to be switched, if anything, that the things which people say are clear are actually the ones which should be causing them some difficulties. The things which they call difficult are the ones that are clear. Statements like, God knows what I don't know is very clear. That ought to be labeled clear. And then the other one doesn't look very difficult at all. Whatever it means, you know what it doesn't mean. From here, we could discuss a continuing difficulty that comes right down to today. And whether you're talking about religion or anything else, one of the leading difficulties in any subject is the problem of communication. That is, the meaning of words causes conflict and confusion. To give you an example, people today may say, Jesus is the Son of God. Son sounds like an easy word, all right, and everybody knows what a son is, but it means a lot more than that to somebody who says Jesus is the Son of God. There's an interesting document that has come down through the years from about 16 or 17 centuries ago. It was written by somebody in the Roman Empire who was complaining that people in his day were arguing about the sonship of God or the fatherhood of God and this kind of thing, because it was such a complex meaning to the words father and son that that's all people talked about. He complained. He said, when you go into the market and you buy a loaf of bread, when the baker hands you your change, he says, is the Son co-eternal with the Father or consubstantial? Whatever that means. And he went on to give more examples. He says, as you pass in the street, you greet somebody, good morning, and they say, does the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father and the Son, or does it proceed from the Father alone? That's all anybody talked about. He was complaining about it. He says, I can't leave the house, and that's all I hear. Somebody saying, well, does it work like this, or does it work like that? It was such a complex thing that people were struggling over about 16 or 17 centuries ago. He was fed up. But the problem comes with what do words mean. They can cause conflict within groups of people, or they can cause confusion when one group of people tries to talk to another group of people. Simple words that you hear all the time have special meanings to some people. Not long ago, somebody came to me after a talk and he said, what has God revealed to you? And I said, well, he revealed what he wanted me to know. He told me his will, what he wants. He says, yes, I know that, but I mean, what has he revealed to you? I asked him, what do you mean, revealed? He said, revealed the first time. What is revealed? So the same word now has to be inflated, you see, and it means a whole lot more, which, in fact, he can't even tell me. What he means when he shakes and quivers and puffs out this gust, reveal, is something to do with Didn't it happen to you maybe late one night and God came into your room and he touched your heart and you shivered and boiled and you rolled on the floor or whatever it was? To him, that's revelation. Well, that's more than the dictionary says. Reveal means you take the veil off. So you've unveiled something. It's from the same origin as that word. It means something was covered up and now it's revealed. What you didn't used to know, now you know. But when you say reveal, it's something more than that. And there's many words like that. They get inflated to mean more than they must. And of course that can take people astray because they're carrying around a whole family of ideas when they hear a word which aren't really contained in the word. It's what happens even to, if you're talking to somebody who has no religion, they puff up the word sometimes. You can get into quite a discussion with somebody about trying to defend something, and he's talking about an inflated word, and you go right along with him. Fat as he makes the word, you make it fatter. To give you an idea or an example, perfect. You'll hear people say, God is perfect. Well, look up the word perfect sometime, see what it means. Perfect means does the job. It's appropriate. It's enough. Perfect. No defect. But people blow up that word and they start making all kinds of difficulties for the one they're talking about. Say, well, if he's perfect, he can do this and he can do that and so on. That doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of perfect. I'll show you what I mean. Like, if I said to you, I have a perfect car, a perfect automobile, what do I mean by that? Probably I mean it starts every time I turn the key and it runs smoothly and it's not rusting and so on. But if you start inflating that word perfect, you can start making all kinds of demands. If your car is perfect, you don't need to drive it. It drives itself. As a matter of fact, it should go and do your grocery shopping for you. If it's perfect, doesn't it come in the house and tuck you in bed at night? If it's perfect, it goes and does your work for you. Keep blowing up this word perfect. Well, people do the same thing, especially the atheist tries this trick when he talks to a religious person. He says, if your God is perfect, he can do this, he can do that, and the other thing. And those things don't have anything to do with perfect. God can do anything, they say. That's a very silly thing to say. You see, where people get into a problem with words is they confuse difficult with impossible. See, there's nothing too difficult for God to do. But some things are impossible because they don't mean anything. You'd say of a man, can a man pick up a car? Is it impossible? No, it's difficult. Very difficult. Difficult because of the limitations that the man has. It's not entirely out of the question. The man couldn't pick up and tip a car over by himself. Now, when you're talking about deity, you talk about God, there's nothing too difficult. That is, something too heavy, he can't pick it up or whatever. But some things are impossible because they don't mean anything when you say them. What does it mean when I say a square circle? What is a square circle? Well, there's no such thing, and God can't make a circle square. Because if it's square, it has corners, and it's not a circle anymore. If it's a circle, it doesn't have corners. They're just words that you string together. It's the kind of thing that careful people have been aware of for centuries, that there's no end to the words that we can string together, put one after the other. That doesn't mean they make any sense. Something has to have a meaning before you say, is it possible or not? If you don't understand that, this is where people can lead you anywhere they like. And I have to wonder, what is the Quran for anyway? The Quran talks about the things that cannot be so. It tells you why they can't be so. It gives you arguments to you. It says when somebody says this, you tell him that. This is the reason that can't be so. It tells you, as an example, I guess I used the other night, one surah starts off by telling us as an oath, it says, by the even and the odd. It's reminding us that even and odd are different things. And you'll never find something that's both. If it's odd, that means it isn't even. That's what odd means. It means it isn't even. I tell you I have about an odd number, I mean you can't divide it by 2. And nobody can make it work because of what the words mean. You see, where that usually comes back, or where people try to use that, is the Muslim may take all of these wonderful arguments in the Quran, and he may give them to somebody who says, for example, that God is 3. And he says, look, it can't be so because of this and this and this. All Quranic arguments. God cannot be 1 and at the same time 3 because of these reasons. And the man says, your God is too weak. My God can do anything. He can be 3 if he wants to. Do you know that kind of argument demolishes itself in this way? If a man says to you, God is 3, you ask him why is he 3? He'll tell you that's his nature. That's the way he is. Always been 3, that's the way he is. And when you try to explain, well, how can something be 3 and yet 1 and 3 and so on, then you say, because God can do anything. Well, think about it. If he can do anything, then he didn't have to be 3. He could have been 1 or 5 or 7 or whatever. Or he could be 11 tomorrow and 12 the next day and start over again the day after that. If he can do anything, which means it isn't his nature. That's not the way he has to be. It's the way he decided to be, which is different than what he started off telling you. He started by telling you his nature is 3. He finishes by telling you he decided to be 3. Which is it? The attitude, as I say, of confusing what's difficult and what's impossible lets people get away with anything. It's what puts a stop to any kind of a reasonable discussion that you can have. There are people who will tell you, my God at one time was a little boy and went to school and learned things. So your God learned things? Well, no, he knew everything. He's God. Well, then what did he learn? Well, he had to go to school. He learned things. Round and round they go. Because of a passage they have in their scriptures that speaks of this one they say was God. It says when he was 12 years old, he went back with his parents and learned. He grew in knowledge. They'll tell you, yes, well, God did that. He learned some things. And when you say, but what was it God didn't know that he learned? Oh, nothing. He knew everything. And round and round. That's why some people wrap up all those ideas and they put it in one phrase, and because they can string words together, it sounds like maybe they solved the problem. I tell you, all theology is paradox. Paradox is a thing that seems to contradict itself. In fact, it comes from 2 words that mean to speak against, speak back against. So to tell you, well, science works like this, it makes good sense, and so does everything else. But when we come to the study of God, it doesn't make sense. That's what makes it theology. You see, everything else makes sense. You talk about God, no, that doesn't make sense. That's different. All theology is paradox. As one man who's regarded as being a very saintly individual by a lot of people, he said 17 centuries ago, the reason I believe it is because it's absurd. Silly. Because it is absurd, therefore I believe it. The problem with that, of course, is that if what you're supposed to believe is absurd, how do you decide which is the silly thing you're supposed to believe? See, there's a lot of absurd things that contradict each other. The truth is one kind of a thing. It's only one version. There's a lot of things in conflict that are false. How do you decide which crazy thing is the true one? If you can't use your mind to decide between true and false. That's part of the good news of the Quran, the good news of this message. It tells mankind, trust yourself to know. In effect, it's saying, you will recognize truth when your mind is switched on, not when it's switched off. Telling you want to find out what you need to know, you'll find it when your mind is on, not off. Doesn't mean we don't all make mistakes. But what we do know for sure is we don't find it with the mind switched off. So, by way of maybe some advice, I'll try to suggest that that attitude should grow in a person so that he gains some confidence, so that he's not frightened by what somebody else might say to him. He doesn't get scared by the big vocabulary somebody has, or which school did he go to, and so on. I know many examples of people who thought they knew something, and it was the humblest sort of a person by his appearance who just blew him away. A friend of mine was telling me how years ago, he's from Sudan, he said there was a man, he gathered quite a crowd around him, and they were all silently listening to him talk about the wonderful way that one political system is supposed to work, and they thought he must know what he's talking about. He's got all these credentials and all these letters after his name. And the whole point of his speech was to say that in this system, everybody is at exactly the same level. See, there are no leaders. Everybody's exactly the same. That's how it works best. And while he's telling the crowd this, a farmer came by pushing his little vegetable cart, and he stopped and he listened for a bit. What's this man saying? Nobody else has got the nerve to speak, and this man put up his hand. And so the man looked at him and said, "You had a question?" He said, "No, I want to ask you, have you ever looked at the fingers on your hand? See, are they all the same length? See, they're all different lengths. That's why it works better. If the fingers are all the same length, it wouldn't work as well." And just that quickly, he showed the man that maybe you ought to think again about a political system where there are no generals and no presidents and no leaders or anything. Everybody's at the same level. Will it work? Your hand wouldn't work if your fingers were like that. If your head is clear, it doesn't matter who you're talking to. You don't lose arguments because of what you don't know. If your head is clear, you can take whatever is told to you and give it back and use it. Don't be frightened. Maybe the challenge is not in talking to people about religion, unless you're trying to defend your own view. Sometimes people think they've got a lot of very clever things to say, and they haven't thought them through, but they hope to frighten you with them. To give you some examples, as I said the other night, probably the best thing to do is when somebody gives you some thing that sounds very deep, is to take it and apply it back to what he just said, apply it to itself. Like the example I mentioned the other night was, there is a philosophy that's widespread. A lot of people think they figured it out for themselves for the first time in history. They say you can't be certain of anything. There is no certainty. When they say that, they're imitating a man who lived about 23 centuries ago, who was probably imitating people who lived before him. His name was Pyrrho, a Greek, who said there is no certainty. You know, that might even be true. But can you be sure? That's what you want to ask somebody who says that. He tells you, look, the reason I don't dabble in religion and that is you can't be sure of anything. I've had people tell me that and ask them, are you sure? I say, I'm positive. See, apply it back to itself. Be so sure that you can't be sure of anything. There's a lot of dead ends like that. There are people who come to me frequently and say, I don't believe in God. You can't prove there is a God. Well, as one man has said about 60 or 70 years ago now, he said people who start off with that statement have already skipped a question. They said God, but what do they mean when they say God? Which God do I have to tell you I believe in? But I always tell people when they say, I don't believe in God, I usually say, which God don't you believe in? Tell me about the one you don't believe in. Probably I don't believe in him either. After you explain him to me, do you mean the God that sits on a chair with a long white beard and rolled up his sleeves one day 6,000 years ago and made man and puffed and had to sit down and rest after that. Is that the God you mean? I don't believe in that one. And so on. Many other ideas that people have. The key question comes before this. What do you mean? You said God, you tell me about this God I'm supposed to defend to you. So it is, in fact, that if you really do not commit excess, you don't say more than you have authority for saying, the Muslim may find himself in the position sometimes, I've had it happen, when you explain what it is you believe about God, people will say, I thought you had a religion. That's atheism. There's no God there at all. Because that's one of the attributes of Allah. Al-Latif has a shade of meaning in Arabic. It means the subtle. It means whatever you say about God, you must say this. He is Al-Latif. He's so subtle, he almost isn't even there. Because he's so unfamiliar to anything that you might have in mind. Whatever you think he is, well, you're wrong. Al-Latif. A related word is used in Arabic when they talk about the fabric that's gossamer, the kind of, it's fabric, but you can read the newspaper through it. It's one of the attributes of Allah. Very subtle. So, what I'm trying to get at is, you may often be frightened by people who try to tell you, well, religion works like this, and I can figure it out, and anybody who still has a religion today is pretty primitive. The anthropologists don't always tell it that way. The people who study men don't always tell a story that way. I tell you, in fact, that the most intelligent men have been the ones that maybe we used to think were the most primitive. And the Muslim is in the happy position of not being embarrassed by all that information. The more he hears about the history of religion, the more the truth comes out, the more his iman grows. Because when facts are discovered, they tell him more of what he knew already. I'll tell you one last example of that. A couple of years ago, I finished giving a lecture, and the question here came. Somebody stood up, and he's waving a book in the air, and he says, "You Muslims dare not let me read this book." He's trying to challenge. He says, "There's information in this book which your ears couldn't stand to hear." So the chairman said, "Well, I'll give you 2 minutes. Read what you want for 2 minutes." Oh, he was really happy, and he started reading as fast as he could. And what he was reading was the documentation that long before 14 centuries ago, the Arabs used to follow the religion of Abraham. There's Ibrahim. He was filling in all the details. He said, there's proof in this museum and in that ancient inscription, and you go to this place, you find this and that and all this, saying which professor and which archaeologist found all this information. He read as fast as he could for 2 minutes. Finally, the chairman said, it's 2 minutes. Oh, but he was happy. He thought he'd exposed Islam as being some old thing that was brought back to life 14 centuries ago. And he sat down, and I said, thanks very much. I said, that was beautiful. That makes me happy. Increases my belief. And he was really upset about that. He said, he wasn't supposed to do that. I said, why not? So the Quran tells me that since there have been men, there's been Islam, and now you're bringing me proof. You're telling me that Islam isn't 14 centuries old. It's much older than that. That's what I've been trying to tell a lot of people, and they tell me, no, it started with a man 14 centuries ago. Really upset about that. He said, no. He says, if a religion is a true religion, it will be a new religion. Who says it is telling people what they didn't know before. Which is an interesting idea, because one only has to remind a person of the methods used by Jesus. He didn't tell the Jews anything they hadn't heard before. He told them about the resurrection of the dead, and he rehearsed the stories, and he was always saying, it's written in your book, such and such and so and so. By this man's own standards, this must have been a fake man. He was an imposter. He didn't tell them anything new. He told them what they heard before. Tried to remind them of it. It's just a case of, as I say, using what you hear. If your mind is alert, if it's the truth, it works for you, not for anybody else. If your head is clear. So those are some thoughts till now. I thank you for your time and attention, your patience. May Allah bless and reward our efforts.
Please take advantage of this opportunity. Don't let it pass by. Yes, sir.
It's not working. That mic is not on. Probably just, I can hear you anyway.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me. I should first tell that I am not a Muslim. Sometimes I may become a Muslim, I don't know. Inshallah. But I was born in a Buddhist family. Later I had gone to Italy and I was living with the Roman Catholics. After that I was living in India with the Hindus. And later I read the Holy Quran that was given freely by a certain embassy here. And I don't know to which religion I should follow. Then,
what did you want me to tell you?
The thing that I wanted to ask you is about the revelation. Revelation that you said, revelation, the God is revealed to certain special persons only. Why does not this God reveal to us, that all the general people? Then that is a question that I have in my mind. Because if the God is revealed, God is revealing himself to some special people like Prophet Muhammad, Jesus Christ, or Moses, or Isaac, or some other person like Vishnu Bhagavan, if not Lord Gautama Buddha. I am asking whether you know the reason why the God does not reveal himself to the simpletons like us.
Yes. All right. To start with, you said professor. I'm not a professor of anything. That means I'm working, and I'm not working these days. I'm not attached to some university. That question shows maybe some... that when you think of revelation, you're thinking of something maybe different than what I'm thinking of when I talk of revelation. As though revelation was full of secrets. And to the Muslim, it's not. It's not full of secrets. It has a lot of things in it he didn't know before, but it doesn't contain, can I put it, sacred secrets in some way. It is information which, in fact, virtually any of it could have been found by somebody, but practically speaking, that's impossible. Nobody could discover all of this. The whole human race couldn't get together and gather up all this information and put this together this way. But it's information. It's something like, just as one way of looking at it, is the revelation is something like a menu. It's said to be a guide. For an example, if you found yourself in a strange place, you're stranded alone in the jungle someplace, and all of the plants are unfamiliar to you, you don't know which ones can I eat, which ones are poison, which ones can I eat. Well, you could find out, so you take a little bite of each one. Probably you poison yourself before you're full. So you have, by trial and error, to look around, and sooner or later you meet with disaster. But the Quran, by being revelation, cuts across a lot of the trial and error and says, this is bad and this is good. This will harm you and this will help you. And in that way tries to guide you past the things that you might have found out for yourself, but probably you'd have got hurt in the process or you'd kill yourself trying to do it. So it guides you through a lot of things. But it's verifiable information. For the most part, whenever it tells you about something, then it tells you you can check on this. If this is the case, and you can look and you'll see that it is the case. So for the most part, that's what it's for. It collects what people need. As to why do just some people have it, see, when it is collected, as it is at different times when something is revealed, the most valuable information, what a community really needs, is put together, and that sets a standard. It's there for people to challenge, to say, no, I think it's this. And they have to have an argument with what has been revealed so that they will lose, and the revelation is pointed out to be correct. The Quran says on the subject of personal revelation that each man does have things revealed to him because he has access to the same thing that's talked about there. You see what I mean? If your eyes are open, you can see all of the things that are talked about here. That's God's revelation. His signs, his ayat, are not just these words. Ayat is what usually the word used in Arabic for a verse of the Quran, ayat. But the Quran talks about the ayat of Allah are not just these verses. They're everything you see when you have your eyes open. They're everything you hear, feel, everything you know. These are ayat. They are revealed things. So that if you see the sun come up in the morning, this is an ayat. This is a miracle. This is revelation. Teaches you something. If your mind is working, your eyes are open, you're digesting this. So in that sense, God reveals things to everybody. But when you're specifically talking about the revelation, the tanzil, you're talking about a collection of a whole lot of this material that no one man ever would have put all together. Or the whole human race never would have thought of all these things and put them in a neat book like this. So here's the whole truth for everybody. This will lead you far beyond what you would have found for yourself. In the Quran, it's in such a form that the promise is made that this book is complete and it is to be guarded from corruption. So whatever somebody may offer you from the past to say, here are some words that God said, may be true, but do they come with the same guarantee? Do they also contain words where God says, and nobody's going to tamper with these? Because the Quran says the sayings that people handed down have been tampered with. The words of God haven't been tampered with. So you've got to try to figure out when somebody gives you something, is this one of the sayings that men passed down and messed up, or is this actually the words that God said that don't get messed up? The Quran says these won't get lost or shuffled around or whatever. That's not a reason to believe that they haven't. That's another story, but that's what it means when the Quran says it's revealed. Okay, I hope that covers what you had in mind. Anybody else? I can't see past this light, so I don't know.
Thank you very much for saying that God reveals to everyone. That God reveals to everyone is a thing that was preached by the Gautama Buddha so many times ago. Because he said that there is a thing known as right perception. Right perception means how to use your 5 organs of sense. Correct. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the skin. 5 sense organs perfectly. If you use, you can get the revelations to yourself. These 5 organs have been given to you by the God himself. Then if you use these instruments properly, you can get the revelation. That was preached by a certain prophet in India, he was Gautama Buddha. But in the same way that now you said, revelation can be had by everyone.
Yeah, if by revelation, you mean it in the sense that the dictionary usually says. You will uncover things you didn't know before. God will uncover them for you, yes.
Then thank you very much, because I believe in that. I take it, I don't argue with you, because you have the same way of thought like I have. Then coming to the other one, with regard to the Son of God, Thomas Paine, you might have heard of Thomas Paine, the writer, and the revolutionary man who instigated the American War of Independence. He has said, if Jesus Christ is the Son of God, I too am the Son of God. And everyone in this world are sons and daughters of the God. So he said, In the Holy Quran that I read, I found repeatedly that the Prophet Muhammad had said that Al-Masih Isa is son of Maryam. Al-Masih Isa, the Jesus Christ, is son of Maryam, the son of Mary. But he has never said that Jesus Christ is son of God. But anyway, if you are going to take that Jesus Christ is the only son of God, then all the other people in the world are not connected with God. But my argument is, everyone in this world, or any other worlds that are existing in other places, whether female or male, should be sons and daughters of God.
Yes, the Muslim agrees with you on that point as well. You see, the point is, though, words like sons and daughter or especially son, is a loaded word. It's one of those inflated words. See, if you said to a Muslim, you're a son of God, or if I said, I'm a Muslim, I consider myself son of God, then
all of us sons and daughters of God.
I thought you were finished.
All of us are brothers.
Yes, I know, you said that. I'm trying to tell you.
According to Islam, all of us are brothers and sisters.
Yes,
without religious difference.
Yes, I understand that. No, I thought you were finished.
Huh?
Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. Then I was trying to say that that's one of those loaded words, that if the Muslim hears somebody say he's a son of God, that usually upsets him. He'll jump right out of his sandals and say that, no, nobody's a son of God. But if you stop and think more carefully, that be cautious with that word. One of the most commonly used titles in the Quran for Allah is Rabb. And in English they usually translate it Lord, but Rabb in Arabic is a title that's given also by children to their father. Because what it means is the head of a household. So that the servants and the sons in a household both call the head of the household by the same title, say the Rabb. So that the Arabic word ghulam carries this idea of, it means slave, but it means slave boy in the sense of a son of the household. You are taken into the household. You are treated as well as a son is treated. Used to have the same thing in English. That's what boy used to mean. You said, this is my boy. You didn't always mean this by blood is my son. You may mean this is my boy. He lives in my house. He works for me. We're not related, but he's my boy. Used to mean that a long time ago. So does the Arabic. This is a gulam. So did the Greek word pais, which is the word you find in the Bible applied to Jesus. Said he was pais of God. Well, pais means a son of the household. He's one of the loyal servants whom the master treats like a son. That's why you find it, especially in the book of Acts. There's about 35 English translations of the Bible, and they're split about half and half on this. Some of them say Jesus Christ, Son of God. Some of them say Jesus Christ, Servant of God, because the word means both ideas. A servant son, not a son by actual descent. And that's how the Muslim would view himself. He's a son of God, if by that you mean, am I his servant in his household instead of the household of the devil? And I'm a son in that sense. But it's such a loaded word that Muslims they prefer to stay away from that kind of thing, because you're asking for trouble. You're asking for misunderstanding. As a matter of fact, the Muslim has a much healthier view of the whole thing, as I may have mentioned the other night, to draw maybe the comparison, say, with the Christian. If the Christian says, I love God, the Muslim says, I respect God. If the Christian says, God is my father, the Muslim says, God is my master. The advantage is to the Muslim, because his love of God has moved into respect. His treatment, as though God treats him like a loving father, has moved into his regarding his God as his master, not his father. That solves a lot of problems. You see, ones we love and sometimes our fathers cause us the biggest problems in our life. It's our lovers and our fathers that cause us difficulties very often. Because we may fall in love with someone who treats us badly. We can't help it, though. We just keep on getting the bad treatment because we're in love. We're stuck there. Or we may have a father who doesn't treat us like a father, but we're stuck with him. He's our father. That's the way it is. We can't do anything about it. But in the case of respect, the ones you respect will never cause you any trouble. If they cause you trouble, they lose your respect. Respect doesn't tie you to somebody who's going to treat you badly. You respect someone, and that won't go bad for you if he really deserves your respect. Your master is not going to cause you the problem your father might cause you, because he's your master because he deserves to be your master. If he doesn't treat you as a master ought to treat you, then he doesn't deserve to be your master. He's not your master anymore. So the Muslim has the advantage of moving from love to respect, from father to master. Those are higher ideas. Okay, I don't mean to take so long with that, but as with everything, the answers have to be that big, it seems. Yes, somebody has a very elaborate thing here. Let me see. It's concerning, we have an ayah, and he's quoting from the translation by Yusuf Ali, concerning marriage by Muslims. It said, if you fear that you shall not be able to deal fairly with orphans, marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one. That will be more suitable to prevent you from doing injustice. Could you please explain the conditions that prevailed when this verse and similar verses like it were revealed? Well, the conditions, just as you might find in some places even today, I suppose. But maybe what the person is getting at here is that there are people who, they take this verse and they take a little bit of it loose and they say, oh, it says here, marry up to 4 people. Well, that's what I'll do. I'll get 4 wives. Instead of reading the whole thing, it seems to be talking here about, if you're faced with this problem, one way you can solve it is this. If you're faced with a lot of orphans, what will you do with them? One way to solve the problem is you could marry some of them. Marry 2 or 3 or 4 if you think that will solve the problem. Which is why there are some people who will tell you that the Quran doesn't give some kind of blanket permission that a man can take 4 wives. It has to be in connection with, well, why does he take 2, 3, 4? And they cite this as being part of the qualification, that it should be for some good reason, not just because you think you can get away with something. I guess maybe that's what they're getting at. I see what they're getting at. I'm sorry. Pointing out that because of the structure of this verse, some have said that in addition to the 4 wives, you could also marry some slave that you had, or a concubine or something. Yes, well, what difference does it make? I don't know anywhere where they have slaves today, so I don't know. That's not really my field, but it's like a lot of things that people talk about. They get very excited about them, and I always want to ask them, why? What am I going to do when you're all finished? If I tell you you're right, a man can marry a slave besides 4 wives, what are you going to do? Are there any slaves around? Is there one you want to marry, or why? What's the difference? So that's my initial reaction to that. But it's an interesting question. It's probably worth examining, but I'd be interested to know why worry about it. Unless there is a problem somewhere that I don't know about, or if there's slavery going on, or something like this. So I really don't know. I just don't know the background of all of this, so if I say much more, I'll probably just get myself in trouble. Yes.
Brother Miller, while tracing out the history of religions, you commented that in some cases the emphasis has been shifted onto the personality rather than the message.
Yes.
Now, isn't it also true with the Muslim community in the world today? The Because, for example, if some American book publishes a picture of the Holy Prophet, the whole Muslim world is upset. They raise a big hue and cry. And likewise, they celebrate Prophet Muhammad's birthday celebrations. But when somebody suggests to them, why don't you practice Islam exactly the same way as the Prophet Muhammad, then they say, well, there are a lot of practical problems. We are a Muslim minority in a country, so we can't fully implement it. Let's just praise him sky high, in public meetings and, reciting songs in praise of this. So don't you think that the same fate which befell the personalities of other religions has befallen the Muslim community and the last prophet to a lesser extent?
Yes, I think that's pretty much what I was saying, that in many cases, not everywhere, but in many cases that has been the situation, that the emphasis has been moved this way. In the U.S., the American Brothers have an expression they sometimes use. They talk about the kind of Muslims who you only see them twice a year. You see them at the Eid. They call them the idiots. Because that seems to be their disposition. When there's a party to be had, well, then here we are. But when it comes to some of the basics, that's another story. And of course, a lot of that involves that sort of thing. In fact, well, I don't want to just tell you little stories that way, but I've seen some sorry examples of that kind of thing, where people they are experts in Sirah, for example. They could, you have a wonderful prospect of some people in this community that are Hafiz of the Quran. They've got 80,000 words memorized. There's other people who've got even more than that memorized. Sirah, they can tell you so much about the life of the Prophet, and that may be good too, but the same people who do that, what do they know about the principles of things? So the emphasis has shifted. I remember being in a car with somebody one time, and he had a head full of knowledge like that, but I was eating a sandwich that was wrapped up in paper, and I finished with it, and I crumpled up the paper, and I was looking around to see if he had a bag I put it in or something. He says, "Oh, give that to me." So I gave it to him. I thought he's got a place to put it. Puts the window down, throws it out like that. See? Well, you have to wonder how much good did all that knowledge do if he doesn't seem to understand. That's not really a very Islamic thing to do. You're supposed to leave the earth the way you found it, not make it look worse. That's an example of the kind of thing I think you're talking about. If the emphasis is all here, you can be very excited about this, and you tend to overlook all these other things that are very much more meaningful, possibly. Okay.
In New York, I met this nice gentleman with a white cap, a turban, and a long beard, and a cloak. So I asked him, "Brother, have you read the Holy Quran?" He stared at me as if I had slapped him across the face, and he said, "The Holy Quran? Ooh, why should you read the Holy Quran? You can't understand. Only ulamas can understand." Then I said, "Brother, how are you going to learn Islam in its purest form if you don't go to the Quran?" He said, "You go to Hadith and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's sayings." But all of us know that most of the sayings or Hadith so-called are contrary to modern scientific knowledge and also contrary to common sense itself.
Okay,
Will you comment?
Okay, I don't want to start into that kind of thing, really. That's not exactly on the subject here. I don't want to open up any old quarrels that somebody's got. Because I think that, as I found out yesterday when we were in Kandy, there were some people that came and talked to me afterwards, and I'm sure that a lot of the Muslim community may say, "Oh, yeah, well, some have said to me, look out for them, they're that crazy bunch," but they didn't say the kinds of things that I expected. So if I say too much, it tends to paint everybody one color with one big broad brush, and every man is an individual. It's not fair to say, "Oh, that bunch, they do this." Well, be careful. They might even be ashamed of some of the things that some of their bunch do. Every man's got to be judged by himself. So maybe we can just leave it at that. Thank you.
Hi, things predestined or things solely on chance?
Are things predestined or do they come by chance? Yes, well, that was a discussion that people used to argue about 900 years ago, and they divided into two camps on the issue, and they were both wrong. See, that a lot of times Muslims still discuss that. They say, well, 900 years ago we had the Ash'arites and the Mu'tazila, and they said this and they said the other. Which one was right? And people still want to argue that. They ought to go back and read the rest of the story. The reason we don't have Ash'arites and the Mu'tazilites anymore is because the issue was settled. Most people are not aware of that. It turned out both sides had it wrong, or they had over-stressed one point and missed a point the other side made. So that the difficulty is in the question. You say, are things predestined, or do things happen by chance? You told me, I'm asking you a question, and here are the two answers that you can choose from. I want to say both answers are wrong. See, that's like saying to a man, tell me, are you going to stop beating your wife, yes or no? Maybe he's not married. But you give him the answers he has to give you back, and you've got trouble. So I suppose I tell you, are things predestined, or do they come by chance? No. Both answers are wrong. That's not the way it works. It would take too much explaining to try to go into that. I guess it will probably bore everybody. But it's a good question. The problem is in the question. All right.
For a man like you, the scientific brain, you made a study of the Holy Quran, and you are seeking the truth. But don't you think that for the common man, it's best to follow each and every atom of the Prophet, like growing a beard and wearing the cap? Don't you think so?
We talked about that before, and I want to stress, I guess, that if you do something that somebody does, it might help you. It might be a good idea, but to simply say, do everything that somebody does, might not help you very much if you don't know what you're doing, okay? That's the sort of thing I stressed. I used the example, or maybe I didn't say that here, but I get confused. Last night I was in Kandy. I was using by way of the example of if a man wanted to be a great scientist, he might study the lives of great scientists. And he finds out what one of the greatest scientists was Einstein, who had a mustache. He says, well, I want to be a great scientist, I better grow a mustache. Well, it might be a good idea, but it might not make you a scientist. See? So that's the sort of thing that I try to get at. If people say, do all these things, well, it can be a good idea, but do you know what you're doing in every case? Because if you don't, you might even make things worse. For those of you who maybe heard it before, I know I said the other night here that somebody was trying to follow my example one time this last fall. I was trying to lose weight, so instead of eating lunch, I had a glass of milk. And I used to put some powder in it and stir it up, and that's all I had for lunch. It was time for lunch. I was at his home, and I asked him for a glass of milk. I put this stuff in it, stirred it up, drinking that. He said, what do you do that for? I said, I'm trying to lose weight. He said, so am I. I'll have some of that, then I'll eat lunch. See, you have to know what's going on, or it might not help you. You see, if you just see and do, you might miss something. You might, okay? So that's about as deeply as I want to go into that. It's too quick of a statement to say, you see this, do this. And you also want to be sure that you do not do, as the Quran warns us. It mentions of people, and it can be talking about Muslims, not just non-Muslims. It mentions of people, it says, do they have a book from which they choose what they like? So, if you're going to do something, be sure you hear the full story of things. Don't just take hold of a piece here and a piece there and so on. Otherwise, you fall into that category where it says, do they have this book, they take from it what they like? Just pick and choose and take a few things, find out the whole story of something.
terminate today's session, I'd like to inform you that tomorrow, that is the 13th, we'll be having a lecture at the YMMA Conference Hall, Tamarogora Road, and it will be titled, the subject of discussion is Islam and Christianity. Then on the 14th, we will be discussing the same subject in this very hall at 7 p.m. And on the 15th, at the Intercontinental, we'll be discussing Muslims misguided or misunderstood. And there has been another program which has been added on at the last minute. That is, tomorrow at 5 p.m. we have a talk at the MI for being here with us this evening, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the next meetings. The session is terminated. Thank you very much.